to the Ace Tech Resources Podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina. I'm so excited to have you here today. It is our very first podcast episode ever, and I have a special guest here with me. His name is John Treankler, and his expertise lie in the field of multi-value. So if this is something that interests you, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So relax, get comfy, and enjoy. Let's start with this. John, are you a cat person or a dog person?
Absolutely, dog. I got one in my office right now. Diego Angel Diablo is his full name. Yeah, he just looked when he heard his name. Yeah,
Oh
he's
my goodness.
half Shih Tzu and half Lhasa Apso. So he's a lots of shits or he's a Shitsalops. We're not sure what to call him.
Oh no. Oh my goodness. That's a combination I've never heard.
Yeah. Everybody knows him as Diego. It's funny, there's people in
Diego.
town that don't know my name. It's like, "Oh, you're Diego's cat." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm
Oh
Diego's cat."
my
So you also
gosh.
a dog lover?
I love dogs. I love cats. I'm not gonna lie. I love cats just a little bit more.
Okay.
But, but dogs are wonderful because they give you that unconditional love.
Oh, there's nothing like it, yeah, you ain't gonna get that
Uh-huh.
from a cat, not that I see.
You can get it, but it's different from a dog, that's for sure.
Yeah.
How about you could give me a little bit of background on you, wherever you want to start.
Okay, well, probably my start in the multi-value career
Mm,
would be a good place. Gosh, it would have been about 1975 or 1976. I was going to school in, Irvine, California, the University of California at Irvine, and my
mm,
brother-in-law, Bill Walsh, introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Richard A. Pick, commonly known as Dick Pick. And long story short, I went to work for Dick, doing operating system stuff. From there, I I was still working for Dick when I did the first Ultimate implementation
mm,
on Honeywell Level 6 with Carl Margolis. That would have been about the 80s, I guess. After that, I had a little stint in application software, horizontal applications, we used to call them back then. I wrote a word processing product.
mhm,
Started out as Microdata's WordMate, segued into something called Jet,
mhm.
named after me. No ego there, huh?
Oh,
Jet are my initials, so the Jet word
oh
processor
wow.
was named after me. Um, from there, I went into kind of a consulting. After I sold the Jet software company, went into consulting, kind of a contract programming stint for a good while. Had a short respite from uh, the computer industry. I was actually in retail for 3 years, three longest years of my life. Gave up on that. Went back, and oddly enough, I kept finding opportunities in pick and pick like environments.
Mhm.
Uh, it would have been, gosh, about 2000. Was it really that long ago? Oh my gosh. I started working for a gentleman by the name of Bill Wolf out of OrcusNet in the Pacific Northwest. We were doing an enterprise application for financial institutions. Actually stayed there for about 20 odd years, um, doing a web deployed enterprise app for financial advisors. Um, Left that just over a year ago, and now I'm doing just contract programming for a few different people. Actually, it's uh,
Mhm.
it's interesting. It's all pretty much pick related.
Mhm.
Most of it, even if it's not programming in pick, it's programming around pick based
Mhm.
machines.
Mhm.
So I got a project that I'm working on right now that doesn't have any pick in it, except for at the very end of the line after I get the webhook and the information and the validation and the authorization. I'm going to be writing the answer way into a pick-like database. So pick has followed me around, or I have followed pick around for over 40 years of my career now, it would seem.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. John, I had no idea you've been working with it since the 70s.
Yeah, I'm really that old. People live longer now. So
I'm more intrigued that I would hope that that had a,
it
some effect on multi-value.
it was yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting back then. There were some characters, of course, the Dick Pick. I'm sure you've heard from people about Dick. Dick was quite a character. Yeah, we it's funny because uh, in the early would have been the early '80s, I guess, when IBM was looking for a an operating system for the PC before they settled on MS DOS. They actually took a look at PIC. I was no longer working with at PIC. I was working in PIC and with PIC. But I wasn't working at PIC at that time, so I wasn't around when that actual evaluation took place. And I don't think anybody that was around there is still alive to tell this tale. But it was interesting because I remember when PIC was 300 modes of code. The assembly code was segmented into little chunks of code called a mode. A mode had to fit in a frame, and a frame was 512 bytes, and you couldn't use 12 of them, I think. So it was like there's 300 modes, and each mode was half a K, half a kilobyte.
Mm.
So 150K, which would have, I think, fit on a floppy back then. And it had a complete, virtual memory management system. It didn't. It PIC is interesting that it programs everything on disk. You can imagine that there is no such thing as RAM or memory or core back in the days because you actually work with the disk and the underpinnings of the operating system handle all the actual swapping of stuff, from a disk drive in and out of memory. But so you don't have to deal with it. There's no memory allocation. There's no
Mm.
real releasing of memory. So it was pretty advanced. It had a programming language, a compiler, a a database management system, as people like to call PIC. A nice little applications environment, not an IDE like people would think of. Not a really integrated development environment, but it had an environment where you could edit code and you can run code and you can read and write data in a database and do
Mhm.
the kind of things that people had needed to do. Had a spooler. It
Mhm.
could run. It was designed out at the get go to be a multi-user system, so it
Mm.
it had a lot of things going for it, and a lot of those things I just mentioned. You might know were not in MS DOS or PC DOS. So it was mature. It fit on a floppy. It seemed to me it would have been a real good choice for IBM. Very
Mhm.
sophisticated compared to what they wound up with, but
Mm.
it didn't happen, and that might have been a turning point in the
Mm.
evolution of PIC right there, because Microsoft went on to be a rather well-known company. I think most people have heard of them and Bill Gates, whereas the average person doesn't know from PIC Systems
Mm.
or PIC and Associates or Dick Pitt. There's
Mhm.
certain industries that you tend to keep running into PIC in certain industries like manufacturing and distribution,
Mhm.
logistics, trucking. I see it at schools and hospitals. It seems to turn up a lot. It was interesting that rudimentary development environment that I talked about would look very, very backwards by today's standard, but by
Mm.
late 70 and early 80s standards, it was no, it was something to behold. And
Mhm.
what was interesting about it is that the way the whole thing was designed, it was pretty simple compared to
Mm.
a lot of the environments that people might be introduced to today. And by simple, I mean straightforward and easy to program. And it was easy enough to program that you didn't really need to be well trained, well versed in a lot of computer science to get into a pick system, to get your hands on it, and to start cranking out useful applications. And that was see at that point it was a kind of a blessing to the pick industries, and I think as the decades rolled by, it turned out to be a curse. But uh, the way it all played out is that you had trucking applications built by truckers, and banking applications built by bankers, different than the way people do it today. So it because of the flexibility and the ease of use, and the fact that you really didn't have to be versed in a lot of computer tech to get stuff done. A lot of people got a lot of stuff done. If you look at the value added resellers, the VARs that popped up over the years, a lot of them were in industry, and that's how they got their start. It's like, well, I'm in this industry. Let me write some code, and then once you had some code, you realized that some other people in that same industry could use that same code, and you had a way to turn around and resell it. It it was a interesting paradigm. I don't really know that it's been repeated all that much over the years. It seems most of what I've seen these days seems to go in the other direction. It's like I'm a developer, and I'm going to go out and develop. And what should I develop? Let me find an industry to develop code for.
Let me backpedal a little bit. What does multi-value mean to you in your own words?
Multi-value to me is I like I said, I got to start in a long of a galaxy far away. How does that intro go?
Uh-huh.
Things are different when I got started back in the 70s.
Mm,
Multi-value was at that point, it was microdata and it was pick. There's only a couple of implementations, but they were identical in that I kind of looked at it. My metaphor was kind of a three-legged stool. There was three things going on in a multi-value computer. One of which was the database, which everybody knows about. The database is still with us after all these years. There was also an application programming environment that has kind of been phased out a little bit over the years, and then there was also an operating system. The third leg of the stool was literally an OS. Microdata's implementation of multi-value had its own operating system. Those have gone by the wayside in the 80s. Other more commonly known operating systems, Windows, Linux, supplanted the OS section of that. So that's kind of really not a thing anymore. I don't know if there are any native implementations
mm,
of pick environments anymore. The environments themselves, a lot of that has been not necessarily replaced, but supplanted or enhanced by legitimate IDEs that plug into the multi-value environment like at compile time. So nobody goes into uses a pick editor to edit a pick basic routine anymore. Well, there are probably people that do it, but I don't. You use a modern tool, and you integrate that modern tool back in, so that when you've made changes to your code, you hit a button and the code gets compiled. So those, one leg of that stool got lopped off a good long time ago. The other one has kind of been mostly replaced. So it's what I think of multi-value now is pretty much what most people think of. It's the database part of it, the actual the file structure, how items are laid out, how attributes in particular multi-values are laid out. So to me, it used to be the whole thing. It used to be the everything. You didn't need anything but the microdata environment to pick, environment, get stuff down. Nowadays, the remaining one third of the original environment, the database, is pretty much all that's left of the three parts, and it's typically just a cog in the machinery, one piece of a larger picture. Like the environment
Yes.
that I was talking about that I worked in, fintech industry, database was at the heart and soul of the
Mm,
application. But as soon as you started layering stuff on top of the database, you got away from the original pick infrastructure pretty quickly.
mhm,
And of course, by the time it got to the user, it's a web page, it's a browser, it's JavaScript, it's HTML,
mhm.
it's CSS. But at the bottom, the lowest level of any stack that anybody's using. The database still very practical, still very usable, still has many good applications. Even you know, though there are other databases out there, sometimes a pick database for one reason or another really seems like the best fit, the best choice, the most effective choice for
Mm.
a data store at the lowest level of an application.
I got you. And would you say that's because it's really, what's the word scalable? Is that the word I'm looking for? Is it the best in your opinion because, it's interchangeable? Or why do you feel like it's the best?
I don't know that it's always the best. I think in some applications it's better than others.
Mm, mhm,
Um, Scalability it was never back in the day never a selling point of a
mm,
pick system.
mhm,
And nothing was distributed back then. There was once a mini computer, a mainframe, whatever you want to call it, and then everybody connected to that. So there was only one code repository. There was only one database.
mhm,
There was only one CPU serving a bunch of clients. That model has persisted pretty well. So
mhm,
scalability, I don't think in the way that most people understand scalability uh, was not something I would point to as an attribute of a multi-value system to get somebody excited about it or interested in it. What what I I stress to people is that simplicity that I was talking about, the
mm,
attribute of it that made it available to people that didn't have a deep knowledge of computer systems, that made it easy. The programming language, the basic language, very simple, like the name says, very straightforward, very easy to understand, very easy to learn, very easy to work with. The database, the same thing, very simple, very straightforward, very easy to work with. And the integration between the two, the reading and writing of records from within a basic program, straightforward, easy to understand. So you could give somebody a quick training class. Our mutual friend John Sisk was in that business for a really long time. Matter of fact, he still is. You could give somebody a very quick training class and get them to write an application in a day.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and because of that, the simplicity of the environment, there's not a lot of moving parts. There's an
Mm,
easy to learn language. There's an easy to learn database environment,
mhm.
and it was easy to model a business solution. People who didn't know any of
Ah,
COD's rules could pretty easily understand. Well, if I have an invoice and that invoice has a customer number, that customer number points to a record in a customer file. And they didn't need to think it out any deeper than that
mhm.
because the actual implementation wasn't any deeper than that. The like
Ah,
the line
okay.
from Dune, the worm is the spice is the worm. The data model is as simple as a data model you could possibly imagine. If you look at how
Mm,
data are laid out in SQL databases, for example, you have to have a pretty good understanding of what's going on to get in to get into the data. But in the pick environment, it was simple. It's too simple. Some people thought it was too simple. That was always one of the digs on the pick environment. It's too simple. It doesn't adhere to COD's rules. It's not surely relational. That kind of stuff. Um, those perceived limitations did not keep people from writing applications back then, and they don't keep people from writing
Mm,
applications now. If you
mhm,
look at some of the alternatives to RDBMS, relational database management systems out there, uh, some people might say PostSQL or NoSQL is is a thing in the database world, and there's a lot of people adhering to the NoSQL ways of doing things, the NoSQL paradigms. Um, Even really simple key value databases. An actual pick data model is kind of a fancy key value set for the most part, which made it, like I said, very simple to understand the database and very simple to use the database to model relationships between data that were useful in a business environment. So the short answer to what do I think of when what does multi-value mean to me? The short answer is at this point in time, in 2023, multi-value means a multi-value database as part of a larger application.
wow. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, John. Wow, yeah, that's very cool. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm still trying to figure it out because when I started, the first place someone naturally goes to is Wikipedia, and I was like, I was like, what is multi-value? And I don't have experience, John. This is not my background. I've been, working with special needs people for like 8 years. So I'm like, I don't know, programming or uh,
From special needs to the pick
special.
industry, there's a joke in there, but I won't make it now. There's well, it's funny if the bulk of the databases in the world right now are relational databases, the SQL kind of stuff. And when you get the SQL people and the pick people in the same room with each other, it's like each of them thinks the other is not not
Stupid.
functioning properly
Yeah.
in the head. Yeah, yeah. I wanted there's a word that we used to use that's gone out of style that starts with an R that I'm not going to use in that context. But there, yeah,
Oh my
the
gosh.
multi-value people think look at the relational people and they go, why do you make everything so complicated? And it's needlessly complex.
Mhm.
And the arguments that the relational people make about the pick people. Um, Usually talk about the shortcomings of data typing and
Mm.
how how easy it is to get bad data into a pick system. It's typically more difficult to
Mm.
put bad data into a relational system into an SQL database than it is to get into into a pick database. So,
Mhm.
anybody who's ever been around a pick application for any period of time will tell you that it's like, yeah, there's a lot of GIGO, a lot of garbage in, garbage out going on
Mm.
in these
Mhm.
pick applications, mainly because the database doesn't enforce any constraints about what kind of value can go into which fields. Like if I have a field that's supposed to be a dollar amount, somebody ought not to be able to put their name into it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
This field is supposed to contain a zip code, maybe it ought to be a properly formed zip code. Um, Pick itself, the database part is pretty freeform. It lets you do what you want with things. Um, a lot of rope is the metaphor that you hear all the time in the pick world. Enough rope to hang yourself. Um, the Some people see that as an asset. People see that as a benefit, and some people see that as a liability.
Mm.
It can be both, but in the short term, if you're just getting started, like I said, how simple it is, you can go in and I can write an application in a matter of minutes, put a little basic program together that puts some prompts on the screen that says, "Hey, give me a customer's first name, give me their last name, give me their address, give me their zip code," and I can
Mhm.
put that away in a database without having to think about fancy database constraints. Is like does that zip code really have to be a zip code? No, whatever they type, I'm gonna stick it in there. It's
Mhm.
a like I said earlier, it's a blessing and a curse. The simplicity is a blessing in that it enables people to get into it, and start getting work done really, really quickly without having to worry about a lot of things. It's a curse because at some point in time, those things that you didn't worry about when you started are gonna come back and haunt you. You've got 10,000 customers. I'd like to mail to them. Do you have proper zip codes for 10,000 of these customers? Sometimes even country codes. Uh, I, I've got some that are US. I've got some that are USA. I've got some that are U.S.A. I've got some that are U.S. Dot.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? I've got some that are America. I've got some that are America. I've got some that people don't know how to spell America. I've got some where people don't understand that the USA is different than America in general.
Mhm.
Um, and if you don't enforce your database constraints, you wind up with
Mm.
that GIGO problem that I talked about. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of what I see in the pick related world lately has been people with mature applications that were developed in a pick database, in a pick environment. Mature applications that have been around, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years sometimes, and for one reason or another, somebody at the top levels of the organization has determined that, well, we need to get this off of a pick database onto say, an SQL database. That's the most common path. And the very, very first, I had to go through one of these myself, and that fintech company I was talking about. The very, very first thing that you have to do is you have to recast all the data out of your pick database into an SQL database, and you're typically going to have constraints in the SQL database, and at every level and every folder and every record and every table and every row, you're gonna you wind up with, oh, I tried to import 180,000 of these things, but 20,000 of them wouldn't come into the database because it's not properly formed data. And again, that old blessing and the curse. The blessing was in the
Mhm.
pig data, and the pig data, I didn't care. I had bad data. I mean, it ran just fine. If I put US or I put USA or I put United States on a mailing label, it gets mailed, right?
Mhm.
Over in the relational world, it's like, no, it's a square peg. You cannot fit this into this round hole.
Mhm.
um, it's always enlightening. I like to use a Vegas odds maker kind of a thing that I do, um, when I'm converting data, and I say, well, you've got this number of fields to convert from your pick database to your SQL database, and here's the constraints on the SQL database. If you had 100,000 of something, how many of these 100,000 do you think came over cleanly, and how many of these 100,000 had to be cleaned up before they couldn't be imported into the database? And so
Mm.
always do I'll be like an over under, like they would do in Las Vegas. It's not a bet on who's going to win the football game. It's going to be a bet on the point spread, right? So I
Mm.
go, well, you have 100,000 of these fields. Yeah, I'm going to put the over under at 950,000 of them came over. Do you think more than 950,000 of these came over, or less than 950,000 of these came over? Um, People who won these bets took the under consistently, because it was always shocking, always surprising
Mm.
for people to see that, how much of their data was indeed, quote, bad, quote, data. But on the other hand, they weren't shocked to know that their application ran day after day, week after week, month after month, without glitches. So the we were going back to one of the perceived benefits of a multi-value system. It's like, to me, it you can look at that as a benefit, that you don't have to be as rigorous with the shape of your data to make your application run. It's real easy to cast that as a to me, it's real easy to cast that as a benefit. It's like, yeah, you don't have to worry about database constraints. Just get your application up and running. You can go worry about that when it's a problem. When it becomes
Mhm.
a problem, that's when you fix it. The relational database guys just cringe. It just they start to hyperventilate when you use logic like that. They go, no, 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 no. There's no reason ever that you should be putting data that isn't the shape of the data that it was originally designed to be into a
Mhm.
database. One of the issues with that is that you don't always know what the shape of the data will be when you start development. And sometimes in a relational database, once you get the constraints in place, it can be difficult to go back and say, "Oh my gosh, we set up a zip code for 5 digits. We really need 9 digits. We need a zip plus four." That that could be that could be a little bit of a nightmare in some systems, and in a PIC system, it's like, just tack on the last four, throw them in there. Nobody cares. So, like I said, a blessing and a curse, an asset and a liability at the same time. It's 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 it's
Wow.
interesting to compare it and contrast it to some of the other environments, and it's interesting to see the difference in the mindsets between the people that use the different products. And I'm not saying that everybody that uses PIC is sloppy with their data. There's just because the database doesn't enforce constraints, it doesn't mean the database programmer cannot enforce restraints. And the good database programmers would do that. I mean, and in a typical environment, if I've got a web page and I'm in there, I'm typing in something that's presumed to be a zip code. There should be at least two places sometimes three places where you check to see if that's a valid zip code or not. Typically,
Mm.
at the user interface level, the web page, let's say, if I've got a field that's designed to type a zip code in, and it's an American zip code. If I start typing, 9932, it ought to let me type a nine and a three and a two. But if I start to type a J or a T, it ought to complain to me and say, "Hey, this ain't Canada. And
Mm.
we ain't gonna let you put ain't gonna let you put letters." And then at some point, once the user interface makes a decision, yeah, this is a valid zip code, and it passes it down to the next layer in the application, there ought to be a business rule in there that looks at the zip code and says, is this really, I mean, yeah, it's 9 digits, but I know that 19999 isn't a zip code.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
9 digits or 5 digits. Say, yeah, the application says, well, that's 5 digits, and they look like it might be a zip code, but the next layer might say, yeah, it's formed like a zip code, but it's not a legitimate zip code. We might not want to let it in. And then again, at the lowest layer, the database layer, the database is generally going to be designed with constraints that the layers
Mm.
above it have to have made a good decision about the zip code that it's trying to put into the database, because when they go to put it away in the database might just complain and say, no, this is not something I can store in a zip
Mm.
code field. So those that need for constraints that in data to prevent garbage in, garbage out at data at different levels, they don't go away just because the database doesn't enforce them. And like I said, a good programmer, whether it's a multi-value programmer or relational programmer or whatever programmer, puts puts the checks into the application at the appropriate levels to make sure that doesn't happen. But it tends to still happen.
Oh my gosh, John, thank you. You are full of knowledge. This is amazing.
Yeah, that this may be. I'm not sure what your audience is. This may a lot of what I've talked about may have been hella technical for people who
That's
don't have a
okay.
database or an applications programming
Mhm,
background. I
mhm,
mean, ACE itself is. I mean, you place people who are in the industry who have
mhm.
knowledge, and my presumption is that the kind of people that you're dealing with should be able to follow what I'm talking
Yes.
about.
Mhm.
Whereas, yeah, the average person off the street who doesn't know all they know about multi-values is what they read on the Wikipedia page. I'm guessing 90% of what I just did would have gone over their head.
No, it's great. Yeah. Yeah, this is wonderful. It honestly, I feel like the listening audience is gonna be all over the place, all over.
Yeah.
young, old.
Well, you've got more questions for me, and some of these questions I will not be going into crazy technical bits and bytes terminology to
Yeah,
answer these questions. So
perfect. Well, we're almost done. No worries. Do you have any of your just fondest, most favorite memories in this particular field of multi-value?
I have a few, yeah.
Mm.
When I first got attracted to computer programming, one of the terminologies that was applicable to writing a piece of code was called adding intelligence. Um, AI is a different kind of a thing now than it was back then. Artificial intelligence is a different thing, but back then the idea behind writing a piece of code was you could add intelligence to a computer system. You could get it to do something that it didn't know how to do before.
Mm.
So, like the simple example that I was saying, well, I got a computer, I got a CPU, I got a hard drive, got a database. It doesn't know how to do basic CRM, contact resource management. It doesn't know how to
Mhm.
track clients and enter their names and addresses and zip codes. I can put together a little application that puts, I can design
Mm.
a little database. I can lay out the fields. I can say, here's a first name, here's a last name, here's an address, here's a zip code, and I can put together an interface that will allow a person to go in and add the applicable records to the database. And now when they go back and query the database, they've got something useful in the database that wasn't there before. So you started with an empty database, and now you've got a database that's the beginning of a CRM system. That's something you produce something not exactly out of nothing, but pretty close. I mean, where there was no understanding, no knowledge of names and addresses, not now there is.
Mhm.
That was to me the initial lure of being able to program. I mean, the first program I write for I equals 1 to 10, print I next I. Of course, what did it do? It spit out the numbers 1 through 10 on a screen. It's not an earth shaking application by any means, but before I wrote that code, that computer couldn't count to 10 like that.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so anything that had to do with making something out of nothing, making something possible where it was impossible. But anything that had to do with adding intelligence to a computer system always fascinated me. The ones that were the most satisfying were the ones that people said couldn't be done. You've heard this from a lot of people in a lot of fields a lot of times. It's like it's super satisfying when somebody says, "Oh, you won't be able to get there from here," and you prove them wrong. Um, that's the ultimate project that I alluded to briefly. For some reason, people thought that we couldn't duplicate the microcode. I hear I'm going bits and bytes again. For some people thought we couldn't duplicate the microcode that ran a reality system. You know what I'm saying? On a Honeywell system. It's like, oh, Carl was pretty good with microcode, and we got it done. Um, that's a fond memory to me. The idea that people are better at what they do, their jobs. Anybody who took one of the systems that I helped produce and used it in their day to day life. Anybody who got more work done, anybody who was more productive, anybody who made more money, anybody who contributed to the GNP of their country did a better job at what they did because of a tool that I had put together and they were able to use. That's a fond memory. I always like to see feedback from people who said I used whatever it is, jet word processing. So I used what it is that you produced and it made my life better. That was always filling to me, and that turns out to be a fond memory to me.
Oh,
I
okay.
have many other memories that I would call fond memories of things that happened in the pick world that weren't computer related that probably are not uh, suitable for this particular discussion. Yeah, it was fairly wild in Southern California in the 70s and the 80s. Let me put it that way.
Wow.
But
Oh, lucky you.
yeah, I survived it. It didn't come away with any bad habits or bad diseases. So I
Thank
guess
goodness.
got that going. I've got that going for me. Yeah.
That's oh my gosh. Yeah, that's amazing. I only got a couple more. How about oh, this might be a good one. And don't worry, fancy lingo is fine. What do you think the future of multi-value looks like? What can we expect?
I think I may be in the minority of this. I think the future of multi-value is fairly bright, and I think it's going to be around. I think multi-value has a future. I think it has some legs. I think it's going to continue to be a player in the marketplace in the particular niches that it exists right now. Um, there computing for the sake of computing is not all that useful. What drives the computing industry is applications, and there are a lot of multi-value applications out there. They're not all going away. The people that are trying to make them go away are finding out it's harder to do than they
Mhm.
anticipated. So just because there's a good body of work out there, it's going to be hard to make it go away from the applications viewpoint. The existing applications aren't going to go away. At some point in time, everything has a lifespan, and none of those applications are going to be here forever. So going forward in the pick world, the the multi-value world, I'll say, going forward in the multi-value world, there has to be new development. We can't just continually go back
Mm,
and rehash old existing applications. New development is going to be in the long term what's going to drive the industry forward. The There is a role for multi-value databases in applications development. Has somebody who has seen both structured query languages and relational databases and pick-like databases. The claim that most people make that multi-value databases are easier to get up and running in an application environment, I think has some merit, and I don't think that's going to go away. There's other people out there with similar databases, the NoSQL crowd, the MongoDB, and those kind of things. They're around. Nobody's predicting their demise anytime soon. People think they have a bright future, and yet they're not SQL. So
mm,
there's a place for everything. A minute ago I said horses for courses. I think a better metaphor is use the right tool for the job. If you probably I don't know if you live where there's snow, but if you go out to move snow and you got a pitchfork in your hand, you're going to have a hard day. And you may not have hay where you live either, but I can tell you if you try to move hay with a shovel, it ain't going to work. So, in some situations, a multi-value database is a very, very, very good fit. It's the best tool for the job, and I think those situations are going to continue to recur over and over and over again. Having said that, on the downside, um, when I look at what the average developer does to develop an average application, they usually do it in a very top-down approach,
mm,
which is to say they start with a development tool, and then that development tool connects to a framework, and that framework connects to a database. So in this top-down approach, it usually literally does not matter what database. is at the bottom of the stack because the programmer, the developer is insulated from that by the layers between them and the bottom of the stack.
Mhm.
So if I go to pick a particular applications development environment, a particular framework, that framework will have hooks to various databases. And if that
Mm.
framework is not hooked to a database, well, that database won't get picked. So if I go out to a framework that says, "Oh, look, I can hook it up to Microsoft's SQL product, I can look it up to Postgres SQL product, or I can hook it up to MongoDB." Well, two of those happen to be SQL. One of them happens to not be SQL, right? But
Mm.
if I don't have a hook to any of the multi-value databases that we are talking about, it's never going to get picked. So I could pick something that's SQL. I can pick something that's not SQL, but I can't pick something that's multi-valued just because the infrastructure is not there to connect those products to those
Mm.
databases. And
Mm.
I don't see a lot of people in the multi-valued industry working to address this particular shortcoming.
Mm.
If I were trying to sell multi-valued for a living, I think I would have one part of my organization going out there and putting the connectors together that say, "Whoa, anybody who's connecting in this particular environment, who's developing in this particular environment, and who's connecting to these databases, now look, hey, you can connect to my database as well." And I don't see people doing that.
Mm.
So I think to the
Mhm.
extent that those kind of connectors are developed, the multi-value databases are going to continue to have relevance to the extent that they're not there, which is mostly the case right now. It's going to be very difficult in the long term to keep the multi-value databases around. If I'm
Mhm.
developing an application, I don't want to have to build my own framework. I don't want to have to build my own IDE, and I don't want to have to build my own database connectors. I want to use off the shelf parts. And when you use off the shelf parts, you come with the off the shelf selection of databases. And like
Mm.
I said, if multi-value databases aren't in that off the shelf collection, nobody's going to use them. And if nobody uses them to develop new software, eventually they're going to fade away.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, well, me,
Whoa.
me, and me and my peeps, the guys that I talk to that have been doing this for a good long time, um, we have these conversations.
Yes. I mean, and you have to, y'all have put so much of your life and soul into it. Yeah, so y'all I mean, you all know it better than anybody. Yeah, that's amazing. So basically you could see it being around as long as it can adapt.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
As long as it fits into the paradigms, the modern paradigms of application development.
Mhm.
And if if you can find a way to get yourself on that list of databases, then
Mhm.
yeah, somebody can pick your database as the bottom layer of an application that they're developing. But
Mhm.
if their infrastructure doesn't connect their application environment with your database, and they can't pick your database, well, they're not going to pick your database, and they're probably not
Mhm.
going to run out and try and to develop a connector just to connect to a database that they're not familiar with. So
Right.
yeah, adapt to the changing world of applications development, I think is very, very important. And I see, I'm not saying that the multi-value people aren't doing it. I just would like to see more of it.
Right. Yeah, give it some love, some TLC. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's perfect, John. Thank you. Thank you. Well, one last one for you.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh yeah, you basically answered that one. That's awesome. What your major gripes were. Yeah, you let me know that one. What advice would you give someone just coming into this field of multi-value?
I would say understand what multi-value is good for and understand what it's not good for. And
Mhm.
if you have the opportunity to use it and it's good for what you're doing, it will be a good choice for you and you will be happy with it. If you don't understand what it's good for and what it's bad for, and you try to press it into use for something that it's not well suited for, it's going to be a more of a disappointment to you. So use the right tool for the job. I'll go back to that metaphor. If a multi-value database is a pitchfork and an SQL database is a shovel, then look at what you're trying to move. If you're trying to move hay, grab the pitchfork. If you're trying to move snow, you're going to want the shovel.
John, I can't thank you enough. This was more golden nuggets than I could have asked for.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, cool. All right. Well,
Yes,
I
sir.
hope to keep in touch with this. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to more of it.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Sabrina, and I hope you enjoyed our time today with Mr. John Treankler. We'll see you in the next episode.